that there has been a change this year.
As a mentor, Mr. Snow, your role is to turn these children into spectacles, not survivors.
You've composed so many brilliant film scores over the years, but this is actually the first time you've worked on a prequel where you also composed the music for the previous films. What were the challenges in this task?
Well, in the very beginning, I think that the idea from the studio was to freely use anything I wanted from the previous 4 Hunger Games. And I found that, yes, well, while I used a couple of the themes a few times in the movie, mostly it's a complete reinvention because it's a different movie. You know, it's a completely different movie. So I felt that the tone of the movie had to change appropriately. There were no electronics, for instance. That was the mandate from Francis Lawrence. He did not want electronics. So the whole thing is purely orchestral, which is its own challenge, believe me.
But how does it compare to the Fantastic Beasts films where the music for the Harry Potter films was written by someone else? Well, was that liberating that you could work here with things you've already composed or like you could play with?
It wasn't particularly liberating because I used the themes, if you've seen the movie, very little. There's like 3 or 4 spots where a main theme comes in from the previous. I think what was liberating for me is that I didn't have to pay attention to the prequels very much. So I could write new themes for Lucy Gray or new themes for whoever, the main characters. And that's always fun for me, is to not have to repeat myself.
The Hunger Games series gives you the opportunity to also write music for scenes that feature animals. I remember the suspenseful piece Monkey Mutts from Catching Fire, which is still a lot of fun to listen to today. As a composer, do you approach animal pieces differently than scenes that might feature humans?
That's an interesting question. I would say, excuse me, froggy this morning. I would say...
Speaking of animals.
Yes. I think I have a frog in my throat. No, listen, the animals in Catching Fire, for instance, that was Monkey Mutts, right? It was Catching Fire.
Yes.
They're so ferocious that, violence is violence, and scary is scary, and so I felt I just played it like a normal, just a tension, high action sequence, because I don't know how I would interface animals into that, but yeah, pretty much straight ahead as I would always do.
So same with the snakes for this film now?
No, good point. The snakes definitely have their own kind of slithery, curling around music. That's a very good point of yours that you made, actually, Christoph. I'm going to use that in future interviews. But yeah, the snakes definitely had their own kind of sinewy and undulating and terrifying quality to them, but there was still a very different kind of orchestration for the snake.
What does my mentor do besides bring me roses?
I do my best to take care of you.
You really want to take care of me in that arena? Start by thinking I can actually win.
I'm Lucky Flickerman, first ever host of the Hunger Games.
In the film, we see the 10th annual Hunger Games, and a lot of things don't go as smoothly for the organizers as they did in the previous films, where we already see the 74th, 75th Hunger Games. Was there any talk of allowing the score to be a bit bumpy because of that?
Well, I think, yeah, there's a tremendous amount of conflict, as you know, in the movie, and there's a tremendous amount of resistance. The tributes are, much more vocal, I guess, is what you would say. As is always the case, I focused very much on the relationship between Coriolanus and Lucy Gray. There's so many prominent characters in the movie that I felt it was more appropriate for me just to assign themes to each character, which I don't normally do. And the drama, the humanity involved in it, I think is much higher because so many people are opposed to the brutality and the violence of the Hunger Games. I don't think that existed quite that much before.
Is there anything audiences should pay attention to in terms of the music in this film, something you're particularly proud of?
I'm pretty proud of the score overall. I would say if people know what there are a lot more woodwinds in the score. There are a lot more kind of intricate orchestrations, but I don't know if there's much that the that the typical or a typical Hunger Games fan would find something particularly to listen to. I think the vocals are really interesting. I think the Lucy Gray, kind of her other character floating around, this voice that comes in and out, was done by the same woman who worked on all of the Hunger Games with me. And even though she changed the character of the voice from Katniss to Lucy Gray, it's still the same voice and it's portrayed slightly differently. But I'd like to hear what people, after they've heard the score, what they have to say, what they like. I'm always interested in that because you never really know what people hear. You know, I do that all the time with directors. I'll play something for a director and he or she will just think, wow, that's not a comedy cue. That sounds like somebody's dying. And I'll say, no, it's really not. It's really a comedy cue. So I think people have to be left alone to figure without any guidance from anybody about what to feel or what to see, and let them come to their own conclusion.
What happens in there, fueled with the terror of becoming prey. See how quickly we become predator? See how quickly civilization disappears?
Director Francis Lawrence, you've worked with him many times. He has made a name for himself with music videos at the beginning for Justin Timberlake, Jennifer Lopez, and Pink. Does it help to work with a director who has a background in music?
Yes, I think it does. It did make a difference. Some thing that surprised me about Francis, and you're right, I do love working with Francis Lawrence, was right from the very beginning on I Am Legend. I think was our first movie, and then consequently after that it was Water for Elephants or whatever. But Francis was always very receptive for a big orchestral score. Now Francis's background is not in big orchestral music. He was a BMX dirt bike rider, and he was really into more contemporary popular music, I think. And so I was surprised that he quickly got it. Very quickly. I would play him a big complicated piece of music and he would just say, that's awesome. And I'd go, well, what about this part, Francis? And he'd say, that's awesome, James. So, okay, I'll take it. But yeah, he was very, very receptive and we worked very well together. Sometimes
music from films show up in trailers for other films. Your music from Waterworld can be heard in the trailers for Castaway and Titanic, for example. What's that like for you, hearing those tracks where they don't really belong?
Well, sometimes people play a piece I've written for another movie for a trailer, and I think, wow, it works better in the trailer than it did in the original movie. But I would say most of the time, I'm pretty thick-skinned about this. If my music serves a purpose for somebody else, unless it's really unless it's something really like a underwear commercial, I wouldn't be that happy about. But if it appears in other usages in the film world, I'm okay with that.
Naming tracks can be quite tricky because you don't want to give too much away about what's happening in the story. The famous example would be Star Wars Episode 1, where they named the track Qui-Gon's Funeral. Do you feel any pressure when naming tracks?
I do, because one of the worst offenses I made was during The Sixth Sense. And the album came out, I don't know, about a week after the movie. And one of the tracks was called Malcolm is Dead. Excuse me, froggy this morning. Malcolm is dead. And so Knight called me up and said, James, you printed the ending of the movie. Oh, no. But he was very friendly because he and I are like brothers. But I was very embarrassed. And so I'm very careful now not to do that. And I think that the studio also does a quality control check to make sure I haven't titled something that's a complete giveaway.
When a movie isn't finished, for example, when the score is still missing, sometimes it's overdubbed with music from other movies. When you made The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, what kind of music was used, or was there already written music specifically for this film?
Right. Well, in the very beginning, the directors will use what they call temp scores, right? Temporary music while they're cutting film. Makes the editing look better, makes the film kind of play a little bit better in the early stages. But Songbirds and Snakes was attempt only with the Hunger Games music. I don't think there was anything other than there because they really wanted to create the same world. Even though the score is quite different, it evokes the same world somehow. But I would say the style of writing that's in Songbirds and Snakes is probably very closely related style-wise to the other Hunger Games, even if the specific orchestration and the specific sounds are different, if that makes any sense.
Looking back now to your career, is there any particular score that you composed that you would hope people would rediscover now?
It's another good question. Well, let's see. What have I done? 140 some movies. So I have to, sometimes I can't even remember any of the movies I've done. But I would say I'm quite happy. I was quite happy with Maleficent. I liked that score a lot. Before that, there was a version of Peter Pan that I did with P.J. Hogan, which I thought was a brilliant movie, but it was a little too mature for kids and a little too young for adults. So it kind of fell through the tracks. But I think that was one of my best scores, probably.
It's the things we love most that destroy us.